Hello, this is Coach Wilson, and this is Chapter 1, Section 3. Today we're going to finish up our Chapter 1 notes in our civics textbook, and as always, make sure you're keeping up with this as well as your vocabulary. Now, the first thing we're going to start talking about today is the U.S. Census. U.S. Census counts the population every 10 years. That is their job. We get a lot of various statistics from this census, but more importantly, it determines how many people from each state are in the House of Representatives. So, one of the things that we'll talk about when we get to the Constitution and the formation of our government is the how we actually pass laws and the breakup of the Senate and the House of Representatives. Our Senate is based on equal representation, so we have 2 senators from each state. In the House of Representatives, it's based on population. The way we determine this is through this census. Okay, it also gives info on the number of children in families. Okay, and generally they send you an application in the mail to fill out. Now, this year they actually had an online version of it that you could do. All right, but most of the time people tend to fill it out, send it back through the mail. Now, some of the census numbers are important because it kind of tells people where, or it tells the government most importantly, but it also tells historians and various others who study the data where people are in the country. It also explains for economic influxes or economic depressions, things of that nature. There's a lot of data that gets pulled from the census. Okay, now the first census showed most people lived in rural areas. Okay, so the first ever census that they took really showed that a lot of people weren't living in cities. And you've got to think, when we're talking about census data, all right, you've got years and years and years of development that are going to come after this fact. To put it in perspective, the first census was in 1790. All right, so every 10 years since 1790, we have had a census. Now, you get into the 1820s, and the Industrial Revolution kind of starts there in the mid-1820s through the 1850s, and you're going to see a big shift from these rural areas to cities. And in fairness to the data itself and why it seems like a lot of people were living in rural areas, the country was still forming at that point. Okay, the Revolutionary War had just finished up a few years earlier. We just elected George Washington as the first president a couple years earlier. You really have a lot of things going on in the country prior to the first and second census. Okay? Now, suburbs are going to start to develop. As cities develop, these smaller areas or these homes and areas around cities develop because of people needing work and people going into the cities to get work. You're going to see this move from people farming and taking care of themselves to more of earning their money and buying what they need. And then you're going to see the Sun Belt as part of the fastest growing part of the country. Some of these states include South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, all the way through kind of that bottom half of the United States. Especially during this period in time, you're going to see those areas grow. Now, with the Industrial Revolution, you're also going to see a huge growth in specific areas such as like New York and Pennsylvania and those coastal cities that are getting a lot of immigration. But the fastest growing areas, and at least in terms of what the census data shows, is in this red area. Now, it's important to note that until 1850, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, these areas of the United States were not owned by the United States. Okay, they were still owned by Spain and Mexico. Then, as we get into the Mexican-American War, we defeat Mexico, we get all of this land, and then after the Gadsden Purchase, we pretty much finalize what is the contiguous United States. All right. Now, as far as the American people go, just some data on that. The size of the American household has actually decreased since 1970, and that makes a lot of sense if you think about some of your parents or grandparents probably had a lot more siblings than you do. There are some families that, they break the curve, that they're having 4, 5, 6, 7 children still. But on the whole, it seems that a lot more families are sticking to 1 or 2 children, and you're seeing that household decrease. And the reason we know that is because of that census data. You see more women are working outside of the home. That's something the census data is telling us about at least the modern day America versus what it was in previous years. 80% of the population is living in metropolitan areas. If you look at the last election in 2020, you would notice that a lot of the demographics, if you look at, they pull up, county by county where, a lot of the votes are coming from. There's a lot more votes in those metropolitan city areas than what there are in rural areas. And so that makes up a huge population of a state and of our country. And so far, the U.S. population has increased every year that we've taken the census. So that is all I have for you today. Short little section to end our chapter 1. Please make sure you finish up that chapter 1 vocabulary and make sure you're keeping up with all of your notes. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, I'll talk to you soon.